All right, I just had to talk about the Big Five test because every time I see this video, it just these kind of things, it just fucking drives me crazy. Uh, Maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but I just can't help it. So here's Peterson.
Example, they
What does
don't
he
know
got
the
to say?
difference between a percentage and a percentile. Myers-Briggs personality test. Yes, it's old. It isn't psychometrically valid. It wasn't derived by factor analytic techniques. It should be replaced by the Big Five or the Big Five aspect scale, which you can use if you go to understandmyself.com. We've put it online for people to use and to generate a personality report. Um, Myers and Briggs attempted to make a questionnaire predicated on Jungian presuppositions, and perhaps they did a fine job for the 1930s, but that was a long time ago, and there weren't any powerful computational devices of the kind that were necessary to sort out the structure of personality properly, which we've managed to do since about 1960 onward. So now, the Myers-Briggs is a perfectly useful tool if what you want to do is get people to talk about the fact that there are individual differences in personality. And corporations love it because no one gets offended by it because everyone wins. But if you want a personality test that actually tells you who you are, that's valid and reliable, then you use the Big Five. And
Yeah, bullshit. All right, it just drives me nuts. And I guess you have with Peterson here, probably a really good example of an LIE where just like TE has gone fucking nuts. Like, because all they want is facts, data, facts, data, facts, data, mathematical facts. I don't want your opinions. I don't want your thoughts. I don't want to infer nothing. I just want your data. Unless he's speaking about biblical Jesus-y shit, and then all of a sudden he can just kind of like infer anything he wants. Then he doesn't need actual facts and data now. But whatever. The big five stuff. I'm sure most people probably know it, but maybe some don't. So the big five on conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness to experience, and extroversion. I'm not sure how many of you have actually taken this, have read through it, looked at your scores, and then compared it to yourself in your own life, and then ever had that thought of like, what the fuck is the point of this? What did I just gain from this? I also like that there's big five all over the place, and every time Peterson talks about it, he always says, "Oh, go check out the understandmyself.com thing," which is his own site. So it's like, dude, it looks like you're making a business pitch to sell more of your shit. That's all you're doing. So anyway, there's a lot of different sites out there you can go to, not just Peterson stuff. So if you're looking at this, conscientiousness characterizes people who are careful, dependable, and self-disciplined. Some scholars argue that this dimension also includes the will to achieve. People with low conscientiousness tend to be careless, less thorough, more disorganized, and irresponsible. Common features to mention include high levels of thoughtfulness with good impulse control and good directed behaviors. Those in high conscience tend to be organized and mindful of details. Uh, Typology community, we tend to look at this like, oh, it's just J type stuff, or it just organized. You're organized is essentially what that is, which may be more like TI in socionics world. Um, Combination of factors that are going to kick in here. Of all of the dimensions that they actually rate, the one that seems to carry the most interest weight in Big Five is conscientiousness, because that's the one they like to talk about has the highest correlation to how well you're going to do in school or how well you're going to do um, in jobs and business, and especially like middle management level positions and things like that. Bullshit. First off, when you take this test, you run into the same problems you do when you take any typing test, which is that it's always subject to how the individual taking the test perceives the questions, how they want to answer the questions, what mood they're in, how harshly they want to evaluate themselves, or how gentle they want to be with themselves, how they're going to perceive their skill set, whatever. I have seen a lot of people score very, very high on conscientiousness, and yeah, some of them do well at school, but then they don't do much of anything else after that. They just become housewives. Essentially, you get a lot of the SFJ types. They don't do shit with this. Um, Interesting characters that are like those NTPs or NTs that were kind of so at school, kind of mediocre. They were just bored. Um, and then they go off and they, build incredible things or they do interesting stuff, whatever. So, it's just, you kind of getting my drift where you see people who are conscientious, very organized people, kind of annoyingly so. Um, but it's like they don't necessarily achieve much of anything per se compared to people who maybe are less conscientious. I myself took this test and I scored incredibly low, like embarrassingly low on conscientiousness. I think it breaks down into two dimensions of like industriousness and orderliness. And my industriousness was like somewhere around 50th percentile. And my orderliness was like two. I mean, it was something like ridiculous like that. Which to me, it's like, who gives a shit when at this point in my life, it's like, um, I've completed physician assistant school, obtained master's degrees, been an army officer who was decorated in Afghanistan, in charge of other people and millions of dollars worth of shit. I have more degrees than I know what to count. And yet I apparently did all of that with incredibly low conscientiousness. Now, either I just tested wrong, you could say that I just misinterpreted questions and whatever. Okay, maybe. And that gave myself a very, very poor scoring, maybe. It's hard to imagine somebody whose orderliness and overall conscientiousness is so incredibly low, yet did reasonably well in the army. An incredibly organized, orderly, conscientious environment. It just so it kind of makes I'm just like this conscious, like who gives a shit? It doesn't matter. Agreeableness. In other words, you're likable. The dimension that includes the traits being courteous, good natured, empathetic, and caring. Some scholars prefer the label friendly compliance for this dimension, as opposed to being hostile non-compliance. People with low agreeableness tend to be uncooperative, short-tempered, and irritable. Assholes. This personality dimension includes attributes such as trust, altruism, kindness, affection, no, and other pro-social behaviors. Uh-huh. So you're just kind of likable and friendly and whatever. Again, in my experience, I've seen a lot of people test and they always are like around 50th percentile, 45th percentile, very in them right in the middle or very high. I don't recall ever seeing anybody really being that low. So again, people are either not being honest in how they take the test or they're confused by the questions and they're just, answering however they perceive the questions, or that just sucks. If somebody is high agreeableness, again, the really nice mommy types that want to break you a cake and all this stuff, I don't need a test to see that. Everyone can see it. It takes about 10 seconds, and you could probably tell this person's high agreeableness. They want to bring you a little Christmas card and so on. And, we got it. So, what do we need to test for? The guy who's an asshole because he's short tempered, uncooperative, we probably figured it out after a minute or so. Why do we need this? Who gives a shit? It's not a revelation to anybody. Now, this is the one I do like, the neuroticism. It's the only redeeming factor, I think, of the big five. Neuroticism characterizes people with high levels of anxiety, hostility, depression, and self consciousness. In contrast, people with low neuroticism or high emotional stability are poised, secure, and calm. Individuals high in this trait tend to experience emotional instability, anxiety, moodiness, irritability, and sadness. I like this one because we don't see this on a lot of the other typology tests. And this is actually a very important piece. I've mentioned it before. You can run into people of any type, people who are very intelligent, people who are quite capable, a lot of degrees, accomplishments, they own businesses, whatever. But what you don't always see is their emotional instability, their anxiety level. They're moody, they're irritable, they're highly volatile people that are just all over the place. They're kind of okay and calm seeming 1 minute, and then a minute later they're yelling at the top of their lungs at somebody. They're screaming at somebody because of something, you know. Um, People who are very very unstable in a personal way, in a personal relationships kind of way. Um, so stuff like that, and that's important. Obviously, you want to know that in pretty much all walks of life. You know, I want to know your level of neuroticism and your instability and anxiety and all these other issues if I was interested in dating you, or if I was interested in, you know, for friends or maybe a business relationship. You know, is it going to be a volatile relationship because I know that I got to tiptoe around you all the time? You know, so this is probably the one trait on here that's actually rather nice. So like that one. Openness to experience. Here's another cluster. So this dimension is the most complex and has the least agreement among scholars. Wonderful. So even you guys can't agree on this. It generally refers to the extent to which people are imaginative, creative, curious, and aesthetically sensitive. Those who score low on this dimension tend to be more resistant to change, less open to new ideas, and more conventional and fixed. This trait features such imagination and insight, blah, blah, blah. Again, in my experience, almost everyone I have seen that has half a brain has scored either around average or well above average. Just start reading this. Refers to the extent people are imaginative, creative, curious, aesthetically sensitive. People who are interested in philosophy, intelligence, things like that, that you see that on those tests. Who doesn't want this? Even if you actually don't have these traits, if in fact it's not really true of you, but you're reading this stuff and you're like, well, I want to be creative. I want to be imaginative. There was that time I wrote a book and I wrote this little story for my third grade, and you know, yeah, I'm aesthetically sensitive, sure. So people tend to score absurdly high. You have types like LSEs, let's call it LSEs, ESTJs, who have like NE in the mobilizing position in the third spot. Now, I think most of us would say that LSEs are usually types that we don't tend to think about as being tremendously creative, interested in the arts, and just coming up with weird theoretical ideas on space travel and aliens and whatever. They're not people that we normally tend to think of as that. We tend to think of them as rather down to earth, um, reliable, good people, probably very conscientious people. Some Captain America type that's not terribly exciting and dynamic a personality, but extremely reliable, good natured, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, that creativity stuff is not something we normally think of those guys. But because they have any in the mobilizing position and it's in an aspiring position, a lot of those types will dabble in the arts, will dabble in creativity and poetry, writing, things like that, whatever. They'll try to do it themselves, or they'll just enjoy picking up a book and reading about stuff every now and again. So people like that, for example, would probably rank themselves very high in openness to experience. But are they really? No. As we said, they're probably very Captain America like. They're not really the most creative and unusual types, but they think they are. So they rank themselves highly on this. And if you ever listen to Peterson's talks on openness to experience, which is just the creativity dimension, they call it, even they'll mention that their ability to correlate creativity to success is zero, which means they just can't measure it. They have no idea. So you can be very creative, but they cannot predict how successful you'll be in life with that creativity. They have no understanding of how to do that. And so they'll just say that, well, only the exceptionally creative and exceptionally lucky individuals, which is a very small percentage of people, ever actually succeed with that creativity and become a huge inventor or become a musician and artist whose work takes off and they become Lady Gaga. You know, like it just it's very unusual. So the fact that you're going to have people who think of themselves as creative because they want to be aesthetically sensitive and curious and all this other stuff, a lot of SI shit, they're going to rank themselves way too high on this, and it's not really representative of them. So the whole testing process just sucks. Two, their ability to correlate any sort of success with your creativity is zero. They have no idea. Therefore, what is the point of this? This whole trait dimension, just like get rid of the whole shit. Why? You can't correlate success, which throws your whole factor analysis crap out the window. It makes it not very useful at that point, and people get it wrong. So why? Chuck it. Another one. It's garbage. Extroversion. People who are outgoing, talkative, social, and assertive, the opposite of introversion, character shy, quiet, and so on. So kind of a little bit more of that classic extrovert versus introvert type of energy. Um, if you ever listen to Peterson talk about this too, he basically is like, well, these people would make great salesmen because they're talkative and they like to talk to people. Okay, sure. And what? Can I be anything but a salesman? Is that all I can be? Like, Jesus, is there anything else we can do? Again, if you're that outgoing, talkative, and social and assertive, do you really need someone to tell you that on a test, or do people not already see that within the first, 2 minutes of talking to you? So who gives a shit? Assertiveness, though, okay, which probably correlates to a certain amount of SE, but like okay, you're not just a talkative, sociable person because you can be talkative and sociable, but then very agreeable, and now you're kind of more of like an alpha quadrant type that is very sociable and you like a lot of people, but you're not that assertive because you don't want to impose yourself on people. You don't want to do that. You feel like that would be too aggressive or not nice, so you don't want to do that. So okay, whatever. So now if you're assertive, oh, so now you're talkative, social, but you will impose yourself on people more. Okay, that changes things a little bit. Um, the fact that they mentioned that being sociable, being very extroverted is likely to correlate well to um, is likely to correlate well to like happiness, mood. You're more likely to maintain positive moods. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, that's cool. And if you're not, if you're very introverted, you're probably more likely to have negative moods, negative kind of emotional traits, or at least just not be able to be happy and positive. Okay, that part is kind of helpful, but eh. So in recapping this again, the conscientiousness thing, which is the one they probably make the biggest deal of because they can actually correlate something with that one. Again, the way it shows up on the test scores and so on just doesn't come out great. It just kind of becomes kind of meaningless. I came out absurdly low. I mean, so low that it makes you wonder that I must have problems. Like it's that low. Or I must be a guy who hangs out under a palm tree with rum in his hand every freaking day. It's that low. And yet, look at all the shit I've accomplished, which is a lot more than many other people have. So, who gives a shit? And supposedly, according to Peterson, it's like, well, the highest predictors of success is conscientious and IQ. So if your conscientiousness is very low, then your IQ can be so high that it compensates for your low conscientiousness. So does that imply that I have like incredibly high IQ? It does. Do I think I have incredibly high IQ? No. I think I'm just your typical average guy. Really. I'm nowhere, I would not put myself anywhere near genius levels or anything like that. So I'm just your average guy who still made it pretty well, even without all this conscientiousness. So what are we doing? Agreeableness, again, who cares? We can all tell. Neuroticism, that's a good one. Okay, we got one. Openness to experience, I already pointed that. Who cares? Extroversion, who cares? So what's the point of this entire test? Gives a shit. And nothing in here tells you about the motives behind people, more differences behind people, how to communicate better with people. All that stuff, you at least get something about that if you do shit any of the other typology tests. Myers-Briggs, if you do socionics, especially a lot with socionics. You could do it Kiersey. You could do it a whole bunch of other ones that all do it better than the big five. So Peterson, sorry, I would argue that your big five factor model is probably the shittiest, most useless fucking test of them all. So let me know, guys, in your comments what you think. If you agree, if you disagree, if you think I'm nuts, I'd like to hear about it. This test is just one of those things that drives me nuts every time I see it.